All right, we're going to dive into the Prestige 7000 sequence now. We covered the 10-inch in that last episode. Learned a few things doing it myself. It's going to be a long sequence, and I don't know how far we'll go with it. And that's a cat walking right in front of my freaking camera. Wouldn't you know it? Daisy's rather intrusive, as most cats tend to be. 7,000 sequence, these cabinets here. There's about 500 per cabinet, per shelf. And, 250, 500. And Prestige starts here. So I have nearly 600 Prestiges. Swingsville, Moodsville, New Jazz, 7,000, 71, 72, 73. And these last door here, 74, 75. And a few things up past that. So it's a big sequence. It's a massive body of work that Bob Weinstock and company undertook at Prestige, starting in 49. And we're going to go through to about 1970. So we're going to cover about 20 years of the Prestige label. And it's a fairly incredible documentation of both black and white artists, of innovation, of playing with contemporary musicians, with classic musicians. He really covers a wide swath of the jazz kingdom. There's even a Bluesville sequence, which we're not going to talk about very much, but they really had a open door policy, really. If you could play, we'll give you a shot, it seems like. They don't seem to develop relationships with their musicians quite the same way as a Blue Note or a Riverside did, where those guys stayed forever, much more temporal, more of a stepping stone type of label. But that being said, some artists did make their best records at Prestige. Sonny Rollins, for example, made some of his best sides at Prestige. Some of Monk's 10-inch work, which is compiled in the 12-inch series, is outstanding. I was noticing in Bemshaw's Swing the other day how much he embodies the sound of a guy knocking on a woman's door at times. It's just like this dang, 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 dang. This repetitive kind of urgency in his playing. Few people can pull off playing in trio settings or even solo like Monk can. A pretty special player. And I've been going through some of this stuff the last few mornings, in the last few days, honestly. And of course, I'm pretty familiar with the body of work. It's especially the early stuff, and the late stuff isn't as tough to digest because it's a lot of soul jazz, of course. So that being said, let's jump into Prestige 7000. All right, so Prestige 7001 is the great Billy Taylor, and I'm pretty sure this is a compilation of some of his earlier material. It's a record you don't see a ton of. It's a pretty rare LP. Hasn't been reissued a lot. One of the great attributes of the Prestige label, of course, is that the OJC people have reissued so much of the Prestige canon, making a lot of it very familiar to people. For example, there was an OJC release of Stan Getz Quartets. And again, this is from earlier material. That's an OJC pressing. 7003 is Milt Jackson, who is one of the great vibraphonists of jazz in this era. 7004, Lee Konitz. And a lot of these ones here are going to be OJC titles. Concord, the Modern Jazz Quartet. And by the time they come here to Prestige, they have that modern lineup in place, and they're kind of starting to do that crossover third stream with European traditional sounds blended in with the sounds of jazz. Mulligan plays Mulligan. Now, of course, Jerry was one of the great composers and arrangers of this era. That's 7006. A nice album cover on that. You can see his face there when he was a young man. Sans the beard, which he became quite famous for later on in his career. 7007 is Miles, the Musing of Miles. And that's an interesting Miles session. He's from probably 53. It's with Pettiford, Red Garland, and Philly Joe Jones. So not a traditional Miles setting by any means. It's Miles in his in-between period, where he's kind of really struggling defined his sound and identity, and he hasn't really become the classic Miles that we know of by that point yet. And there's quite a few anonymous Miles in this early sequence here. This is Wardell Gray, 7008 Memorial, Volume 1, followed by Volume 2. And Wardell Gray is a fantastic bebop player from the West Coast scene on Central Avenue. Had a couple famous battles with Dexter Gordon, playing with Teddy Charles. Central Avenue in LA had a great jazz scene in the mid-40s. Bebop was really the sound of the 40s that was happening. Parker and Gillespie, those guys come out there and play. And there was quite a few cats on the West Coast doing their thing. Here's Elmo Hope, a great piano player. Kind of in the Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk. That bebop, post-bebop, modern, sometimes minimalist, sometimes hints of the avant-garde, Herbie Nichols, New York piano players with real dynamic playing. Elmo Hope's kind of a forgotten name. Here's James Moody. It's a nice original pressing of that, number 7011. Moody had a hit with a song of his in the late 40s. Is it on here? It's not. But I think it's called Mood for Love or Moody's Mood. It's got a couple different versions of it. And he was kind of an R&B crossover hit. But he was a great flautist and also a great sax player. And he does some great work here at Argo and at Prestige. Here's Dig by Miles Davis. Again, it's kind of a tough one to see. This was Miles Davis recording with another interesting band with Sonny Rollins, Jackie McLean, Art Blakey, Tommy Potter, and Walter Bishop. Still Miles kind of, looking for himself. This is Conception, 7013, which is sort of a collection of sax players, Stan Getz, Sonny Rollins, Jerry Mulligan, Lee Konitz, Zoot Sims, and Miles Davis. It's a collection. By no means are those guys all on every track. It's a track from each one of those guys. And then that album got reissued with this cover, which is an OJC version with the second cover. I kind of prefer the first cover myself. 7014 is the first Miles Davis quintet record. And it's not even really labeled as the Miles Quintet at this point. It's just called Miles. But it's Cannonball. Not Cannonball. It's Red Garland, Philly Joe Jones, Paul Chambers, and John Coltrane. And in between that and him going to Columbia comes Working, Steaming, Cooking, and Relaxing. But that's really the first quintet record. Billy Taylor, 7015, Volume 1. And this is stuff called From the 10 Inches. As is this one, Volume 2. Same era, same Billy Taylor, same dynamic playing. Art Farmer Quintet. Come on. This one's with Gigi Grice, who Grice was a great modern player, a great composer and arranger, who had a short career, sadly. Art's brother, Addison Farmer, also was on this record, a bass player, who passes away quite young, actually, sadly, with great Duke Jordan on the piano and Philly Jones on the drums. Number 7018 is Phil Woods, Woodlore. And Phil's a great sax player, a lot of expressive playing. I like what Phil Woods has to say. Some Sonny Rollins Work Time. This is with Ray Bryant and George Morrow. And who else is on this? Max Roach. And so you have a couple of great players with Roach and Morrow and Ray Bryant on the piano player. It's a very good grooving session with Rollins. Interesting cover. Here's Elmo Hope meets Frank Foster. And Foster is a sax player who played with Basie's group for a number of years. Really fun, hard swinging. Rhythm and blues meets good gospel, jazz playing. And Elmo, of course, was more of that modern Bud Powell Monk approach. And it's like a really great record. And Foster plays some bebop on there, which wouldn't be his first language, but he speaks it fluently. It's a really great session. This is The Brothers which is a reissue of that 10-inch I showed you with Alan Eager, Broom Bohr, Al Cones, Sims, and Stan Getz, all the Woody Herman guys playing together here. That's a solid record. Interesting cover. And then the same artist, by the looks of it, is Trombone by 3 by Kai Winding, J.J. Johnson, and Benny Green. Interesting 7023. The stuff's from 1949, probably 78s initially. This is Stan Getz, Bud Powell, and J.J. Johnson. Another great cover. This is, I guess the cover artist here is from one of the Mad Max, Mad Magazine. Something Stone. It's not David, no, something Martin, not David Stone Martin, but it's another Martin. Don Martin, I think it is. Does the cover for these records. And it's pretty cool artwork. It's some of Prestige's cool artwork from this era. And that's from 2 sessions. Stitz on all of it. Powell's on some. J.J. Johnson is some. From 49 to 50, that stuff. This is from 51. Miles Davis and horns with Al Cones, Zoot Sims, John Lewis, Sonny Rollins. And again, cool artwork. And again, it's called from that earlier time period. Zoot Sims Quartets. And again, I think this is earlier material, not from 55, 56 when these came out. Great record here, Thelonious Monk. Just fantastic Monk. I think this is the one I listened to the other day with Bemshaw Swing. Yeah, Bemshaw is just fantastic. Blue Monk is fantastic. I just really enjoyed what Monk had to say on that. It's Monk being expressive and playful and joyful. And in the trio setting, there's so much room for Monk to share ideas. I'm almost, when he has a horn player, I'm almost saddened because he's got to make room for other people. And Monk's one of those guys I think has so many ideas, especially at this stage in his career. It's just like, okay, don't burden him with other players. Let him just do his thing. This is Collaboration West, 70-28, with Jimmy Joffrey, Shelly Manne, Shorty Rogers, and Teddy Charles. Teddy Charles is the vibraphonist who kind of achieves leadership on this session. But it's really a bunch of West Coast players playing fairly modern compositions with some edges and some hints of the avant-garde even coming in there. Great stuff. Pretty rare record. Here's Sonny Rollins with the Modern Jazz Quartet. Also some of it's with Art Blakey and Kenny Drew. The version of In a Sentimental Mood on here by, of course, Ellington is just fantastic. Those tracks will be from 51 to 53. And then here's Kai and JJ, Benny Green with strings. The Kai and JJ is one session, and the Benny Green with strings is another session. And you would think Benny Green with strings, that sounds like a weird thing, but it actually works out pretty good. I have to apologize here. I skipped this record, 70-19. I played it this morning, and I didn't put it back in the right place. That's Sanford Gold, a fantastic piano player who plays with numerous people from Johnny Smith to Don Bias to Stan Getz. He has some stuff at Bethlehem and at Roost. But this is his only record as a leader. One of the rarest Prestige records. It's got a great album cover. It looks like it's sitting there on Central Park somewhere. Wonderful. Piano d'Or, Sanford Gold. That's a rare piece right there. Not one I've seen but one time. This is Art Farmer number 7031. The Septet. Gigi Grice and Quincy Jones helps arrange. Again, looks like one of those Don Martin covers. Great band on that. So you can see, I think that one might be actually from 55. And you can see they're doing some pretty modern stuff here at Prestige. Here's jazz for the Carriage Trade. George Wallington, the Sicilian-born New Yorker who moved to New York at a young age, changed his name to George Wallington. I guess they called him Wallington because in school there in New York, he liked to dress fairly stylish for the ladies, even at a young age. He earned the name Wallington. And George was a kind of an anglicizing of his Italian name. Just fantastic. Donald Byrd's on this with Phil Woods. Cool album cover. And it's one of those OJC limited edition. Not one of the records you see a lot of, really. Here's John Eardley, another great player with Teddy Kotick, Milt Gold, Nick Stabulus, some Western players on that, Zoot Sims, Phil Woods. Young kids throwing it down, you know what I mean? playing that modern sound. Here's Miles Davis with Milt Jackson, Quintet Sextet from 2 different sessions again. Cool cover. Always a Milt Jackson fan. Here's Lights Out, Jackie McLean with Donald Byrd, Elmo Hope. A couple other cool players are on this, so I got to remember who they are. Arthur Taylor, Doug Watkins, Jackie McLean, Donald Byrd, and Elmo Hope. So it's a nice, modern... this is Jackie before he goes to Blue Note. And that's his first Prestige session. And so Jackie's already kind of establishing himself as post-bop, modern, but a complex player, you know. Here's James Moody, his second Prestige record, 7036. That's a great album cover. This is the original pressing. James Moody and his band. Just again, a real Chicago blues and soul, kind of an anonymous band, but Dave Byrne, the great trumpet player, is on here. Dave Burns, I love Dave Burns. Most of the other names are fairly anonymous, but that's what you get when you have a guy playing with a Chicago band. You're going to be playing with names that aren't as familiar to us as the New York players. Here's Tad Dameron, Fountain Bleu. Tad Dameron comes from the bebop school. He was one of the arrangers of that era, a real prominent composer, and a lot of the cats wanted to play Dameron's arrangements, and we lost Dameron way too soon, sadly. We probably mostly know Tad Dameron from working with Coltrane. Sonny Rollins +4. This is one of the best Prestige records ever, I think. 7038. And this is with Clifford Brown, Max Roach, Richie Powell, and George Morrow, which is essentially the Clifford Brown, Max Roach quintet. They work with Rollins after Harold Land leaves and goes out to the West Coast. Rollins does a record with them or 2 on Emersy, and then they return the favor by doing this one for Together on Prestige. And that record cooks, man. It's just solid cooking, hard driving, hard bop. One of the best Prestige sessions, I think, ultimately. 7039, Gene Ammons. Ammons is out of prison here, obviously, and he's putting together these fun all-star sessions. Young Jackie McLean, Duke Jordan, Art Farmer, Addison Farmer, Candido, and Art Taylor. Ammons puts together some really fun all-star bands here in 55 and 56 before he goes back to prison. That's the second cover of that. Kind of a shitty 70s or 60s pressing. Gil Mel, Quartet. Gil Mel has been at Blue Note since the early 50s. He comes to Prestige here in 55. And Primitive Modern, great session, pretty cool cover. Kind of captures the feel. I think Joe Cinderella's on the guitar on this. I'm a big Joe Cinderella guy, but I don't see the band listed in an easy way. I know Cinderella's on a lot of Gil Mel stuff here in this period. Mel's a pretty interesting player. He plays the baritone, sometimes plays tenor. He's an interesting composer, and of course he moves into films and soundscapes later on, which seems to be the road he was on anyway. Here's a wonderful original pressing of Benny Green with Art Farmer, Prestige 7041. Benny Green is a wonderful bone player from the school of the post-swing era, but he was never a bebop guy. He was never really a hard bop guy. He makes that trombone sound like sweet sugar, and just a lyrical, soulful player on the R&B side of things. Moondog 7042. Moondog, of course, was an interesting street character. The Viking of Fifth Avenue, I think he was called. Maybe it's I think it's Fifth Avenue. He was a New York street person that would sit on the street sometimes with various pieces of art, playing music, busking as it's known. Columbia brought him in the studio, recorded him, and Prestige actually does 3 sessions with him. Interesting record, and it strains credulity to call it jazz, but it's got a lot of free improvisation in it, just not in the blues or a jazz sense. 7043, one of the toughest to find Prestige records, really. What a lineup. This is Blue Note quality hard bop here. Elmo Hope with the backing of Bird, Mobley, Coltrane, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. So it's a pretty all-star, outstanding record with a great cover. It was eventually released as an album called Two Tenors back like in the probably late 60s with Coltrane and Mobley as the leader, but that's its original form. Miles Davis collector items. This is stuff that was kind of scraggling pieces that was just stuff they put out because his name had starting to grow in collectors' minds in the jazz scene. He was now at Columbia. He was probably not quite signed with Columbia yet, but it's not a single session there. There's multiple sessions on that with multiple different lineups. Earl Coleman, an interesting singer with some gospel and some blues backing him. It's kind of a cool cover, 70-45. Certainly a record you don't see very often. And unlike the Blue Note sequence, where almost every title is familiar to collectors and people who join the Facebook jazz groups, there's a lot more stuff here in this Prestige sequence that's fairly obscure, fairly rare, and there's quite a few titles that the average person has never seen. You can be a non-jazz fan and have seen some of those Blue Note album covers. A lot of these Prestige records, even the seasoned jazz fans, some of these are fairly unknown. This is pairing off Phil Wood's septet and Donald Byrd, Kenny Dorham, Tommy Flanagan, Doug Watkins, Gene Quill, and Philly Joe Jones. A nice mixed lineup of modern post-bop jazz right there. Tenor Madness, Sonny Rollins Quartet. Sonny's really starting to find his voice here. That thirst, that hunger. Red Garland, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones, and John Coltrane shows up on this as well. And of course, Coltrane and Rollins were kind of considered contemporaries, and a lot of people saw them as competitors. I don't think they saw themselves in that light. They were kind of both at different stages in their career, and their career paths weren't really even going the same direction at very many points. So they weren't really in competition, but certainly people compare Rollins and Coltrane plenty. Here's Jackie McLean 4, 5, and 6, which is a reference to there's a couple quartet songs, a couple quintet songs, and a couple sextet songs. Amal Bal Waldron, Doug Watkins, Art Taylor. Again, great bebop, hard bop kind of confluence there. Probably a blues number on there as well. I haven't played that one in a while. Benny Green's second record, I think, at Prestige. Fantastic session. Great album cover. One of my favorite Prestige album covers. Walking Down. Just a great record. I've played that one quite a lot over the years. It's amazing how much an album cover that you like will help you pull it out more often. Woofing and Tweeting 70-50 is a reissue of Gene Ammons' All-Star Sessions. And I actually have an OJC of that and an original of that as well. Same cover. So I have 3 copies of that record. One with a different cover, one original. And I bought the OJC first. I bought this one thinking it was a record I didn't have because it doesn't look anything like the original. But this is before I had my notebooks, for my binders. So this is a great example of a record I bought thinking it was another Gene Ammons. I got home and I found it was the same session. Then eventually I bought this one because a guy had it. It was original pressing, quite affordable, and I never pass up Prestige original pressings when they're affordable. So that gets us up to 70-50. Okay, so that's the first 50 titles on the Prestige sequence. I think I'll leave it at that because that's like 25 minutes. We'll do the next session with the next sequence coming up right after this one. So a couple days you'll get that one. Great stuff. I reorganized my 10-inch cabinet a little bit. Some cool new covers there being exposed. I love that 10-inch cabinet. It's fun to always dive through there. You can always just feel the history when you're looking at 10-inch records. You know what I mean? They just feel so vintage and old and unique, you know, because they're not the kind of thing you see every day. So anyway, that's Prestige 7000 to 7050. Tune in next time for the rest of that 7000 sequence. And then we'll jump into 7100 after that. So I hope you have a great day. Hope you enjoyed that. Some great titles. You see they're issuing a lot of back catalog, but they're also doing some really cutting edge modern stuff. And it's a pretty wide swath from white guys to black guys, from bebop to soul jazz. Not really soul jazz, but like more soulful players like Benny Green. There's not really a Prestige sound, and that's kind of evidence of it. How wide a swath that covers, from Sanford Gold piano solos to Monk and his trios. And you got to commend these guys for signing Monk, because Monk was a challenging new dimension to jazz. He was not the convention at all. He was a new dimension. And Blue Note, of course, got him first, and then Prestige signs him. And he's fairly unrecognized at this point, and which is sad. It's not till he really goes to Riverside in '56, Brilliant Corners and Duke Ellington and those early Prestige, Riverside records, where Monk starts to get the critics on his side and the consuming public. But he's not really a star probably until the Columbia years, which don't come around until '59, '60 or so. But Monk's is such a great, innovative player, and it just shows you again the breadth of what the Prestige sound was. By the first 50 titles at Blue Note, which we covered in that last series, Blue Note sound starting to really become established by 1550. But here at 7050, there's no clear established Prestige direction or sound or tone or movement. There's not really even a Prestige stable of musicians. You get a lot of the same players from Blue Note, from Riverside. There's a lot of crossover, but it's much more fluid. Things are just kind of fluidly moving along. Players, sessions, artists, covers. There's not anything that's standardized. The covers on that sequence, that first 50, cover a wide swath of artistic styles. And it's much better than the 10-inch era when there was no covers, but it's still a very undefined, unresolved, kind of directionless, whatever you give me, we'll use that. That's fine. So that's Prestige. Again, it kind of shoots from the hip, but there's still, every title in there is worth having. And because so much of it's on the OJC, you can find a lot of that OJC stuff for $20. Used to be $4 or $5 you could find those OJC titles, but they're kind of climbing up in price. And some of the rarer ones will get even more expensive for OJC even, which is kind of getting ridiculous, but that's the nature of the business today. We'll talk to you all soon. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Hit that thumbs up if you enjoy the content. If you want to support the channel, go to Patreon and pledge and support a little money. The trading cards are coming along. I'm over 300 done now. Probably 75% of the way done. But it's taken so much longer to do these trading cards than I thought. Doing the fronts with all the graphics and the photos, that part was fun. Doing the backs with the bios, it's much more like homework. It's much more work. It's not nearly as fun as just putting together the images on the front. But I'm learning a lot doing it. Learning a lot, I learned the other day that Dinah Washington died in 1963. She was pretty young. She was in the middle of her 6th marriage, and her 6th husband was Dick Night Train Lane, the Pro Football Hall of Famer, and she died in bed next to him from barbiturates one night. So I didn't realize that she died that young, because Mercury keeps putting out Dinah Washington records for quite a long time, into the 70s. So you think she's around for a long time, and she, she's probably 40, 45 by the time she passes, I'm going to guess. But it's much too short a life, and it's so sad how young some of these great artists have died. Anyway, talk to you soon. You have a great day. Peace.